It was a sunny afternoon in a quiet, peaceful suburban neighborhood. The streets were lined with tall trees, and the houses were well maintained, giving the area a serene, almost perfect feel. People were out enjoying the weather, walking their dogs, or jogging along the sidewalks. Among them was a black woman, in her mid-50s, walking her dog through the park. Her dog, a small but energetic mixed breed, wagged its tail eagerly as it sniffed the grass and ran ahead of her. The woman was an experienced, no-nonsense individual. Despite her age, she held herself with grace and power, a sharp intelligence in her eyes that was apparent to anyone who looked closely. She had been working for the FBI for over 20 years and had risen to a senior position. Her job was demanding, stressful, and often put her in dangerous situations, but she had always managed to handle it with calm professionalism. Today, however, she was just a woman out for a walk with her dog, hoping to get a little fresh air after a long week at the office. As she strolled through the park, the sound of birds chirping in the trees and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze helped to clear her mind. Her dog, full of energy, pulled her along as it chased a squirrel that darted across the path. The dog was always full of life, always active, and today was no different. But on the other side of town, another story was unfolding. A sleek, shiny car zipped down the road, its engine purring smoothly. Behind the wheel was a wealthy woman in her early 40s, dressed in a designer suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was styled perfectly, and her makeup looked flawless. She had just left an important meeting, one of many she attended as part of her busy life filled with luxury and prestige. She was the kind of person who didn't wait in lines, always had the best table at restaurants, and was used to getting what she wanted with little effort. The world, for the most part, seemed to bend to her will. She glanced at her phone, replying to a text message from a colleague. Her attention was completely absorbed in the conversation, and she barely noticed the street signs or the pedestrian crossing ahead. It was an area she didn't visit often, and she was more focused on getting home and unwinding than on the surroundings. The road ahead seemed clear, but there was no way for her to know that a life-changing accident was about to unfold in front of her. Without warning, a small, brown dog darted across the road in front of her car. The woman slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The dog, caught in the car's path, was hit with a sickening thud. The car skidded to a halt, and the woman's heart raced as she looked in the rearview mirror. She had just run over a dog. She threw the car in park and stepped out of the vehicle, panic flooding her body. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She hadn't even seen the dog until it was too late. It had been quick, a flash of brown fur in the corner of her eye. But now, standing in the street, she could hear the dog whimpering. She rushed over to where the dog lay, its small body struggling to move. She didn't know anything about dogs, but it was clear that the poor animal was in pain. Her hands shook as she tried to assess the situation, feeling a wave of guilt and panic. "Oh my God," she muttered to herself. "What have I done?" The woman knelt beside the dog, trying to comfort it, but it was clear that it was badly injured. She looked around, hoping someone would come to help. But the street was empty, and the only other sounds were the distant chirps of birds and the quiet hum of her car's engine. A few moments later, she heard footsteps approaching. The woman looked up to see a tall black woman walking toward her. She was older, probably in her 50s, with graying hair tied in a ponytail. She was dressed in comfortable clothes, clearly out for a casual walk with her dog, but there was an air of calm professionalism about her. Her dog, the one that had been running just moments ago, was now sitting at her side, watching the scene with curiosity. The older woman approached the injured dog with a sense of urgency in her step. She took one look at the situation and immediately knelt down beside the animal. The wealthy woman stood back, unsure of what to do, her hands still trembling with shock and guilt. "I'm so sorry," the wealthy woman said, her voice shaky. I didn't see it until it was too late. The older woman, still kneeling, didn't respond right away. She gently cradled the dog in her arms, checking for any obvious injuries. Her face was calm, almost as though she was used to dealing with emergencies. But her eyes showed the deep concern and sadness she felt for the animal. "You should have been paying attention," she said, her voice firm but not angry. "This dog didn't deserve to be hurt." I know," the wealthy woman stammered. "I was distracted. I was texting. I didn't see it until it was too late. Please, I'll do anything. Please, just help it." The older woman glanced up, her expression hardening slightly. "There's nothing you can do now. The dog is in pain, and you're the one who caused it." She stood up and turned toward the wealthy woman. "You need to call the vet, or the police. This is serious." The wealthy woman nodded, panic rising in her chest. She had never been in a situation like this before, and it was clear that she wasn't handling it well. She reached for her phone but hesitated. I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry." The older woman took a deep breath, standing tall. She was the picture of composure, even though she, too, was feeling the sting of this incident. Her dog, noticing her tension, sat quietly at her feet, waiting for her next move. "I'm calling the police," the older woman said firmly. "You're going to have to take responsibility for this." The wealthy woman froze, her heart racing. She had hoped that this would just go away. Maybe the woman would forgive her, or maybe they could settle it quietly without involving authorities. But the older woman's tone left no room for negotiation. "Please," the wealthy woman pleaded, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean to hurt the dog. Please, don't call the police." But the older woman had already taken out her phone. It was clear to her that the situation couldn't be swept under the rug, no matter how much the wealthy woman wanted it to be. The damage had been done, and now they both had to face the consequences. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder as the wealthy woman stood in place, helpless and unsure of what to do next. Her mind was racing, and her hands were trembling. She had never been in a situation like this before. Accidents like this didn't happen to people like her, not when you had money, influence, and connections. But here she was, in the middle of the street, trying to deal with the aftermath of a dog she had run over. Worse yet, it was clear that the person she had just hurt was no ordinary civilian. The older woman, still kneeling beside the dog, was calm and composed. Her face remained steady as she gently checked for any further injuries to the animal. The dog, while clearly in pain, seemed to be trusting her as she carefully cradled it in her arms. The way she handled the situation with such professionalism only added to the wealthy woman's feeling of guilt and helplessness. I didn't mean to," the wealthy woman said again, her voice shaky as she finally managed to compose herself enough to speak. "Please, I'll take care of everything. I'll pay for the vet bills. Just don't call the police." The older woman looked up at her briefly, her expression unreadable. She hadn't even flinched at the offer of money. Instead, she simply shook her head and spoke in a calm, yet firm tone. "This isn't about money. This is about responsibility." The wealthy woman opened her mouth to protest again, but the older woman held up a hand to stop her. It wasn't a harsh gesture, just one that made it clear that she wasn't interested in further apologies. "I'm calling the police, and they'll handle this from here on out. It's not your choice anymore." The wealthy woman, whose entire life had been built on controlling situations, felt the walls closing in. She had no control here. She was powerless, and it terrified her. The thought of involving the police, of having to answer for her actions, felt like a personal attack on everything she stood for. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't someone who had to deal with consequences like this. She wasn't used to having her world turned upside down. As the older woman made the call to the police, the wealthy woman tried to find her footing. She shifted nervously from one foot to the other, watching the dog's labored breathing. There was nothing more she could do for the animal, and she knew it. Her mind was preoccupied with the dread of the approaching police officers, the consequences she could already imagine, and the realization that she couldn't undo what had happened. The sirens grew louder until they finally came to a stop near the scene of the accident. A police car pulled up, its lights flashing bright red and blue, casting an eerie glow across the street. Two officers stepped out, one male and one female, both dressed in the familiar dark blue uniforms. The officers were alert, scanning the area as they approached. Their eyes immediately fell on the older woman holding the dog, and they began to walk toward her. The wealthy woman quickly straightened up, trying to appear composed despite her rising anxiety. She had no idea what the police would think or what the consequences might be. She wasn't familiar with the laws in this situation. Would she be arrested? Would she lose everything she had worked for? The officers came to a halt in front of the older woman. The female officer, who appeared to be the senior of the two, looked at the dog with concern before turning her attention to the older woman. "Ma'am, what happened here?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. The older woman, still holding the injured dog carefully, didn't seem fazed by the sudden appearance of the police. She explained what had happened in a steady voice, recounting the events as they unfolded. She didn't leave anything out, and she didn't exaggerate the details. She simply told the truth. "She ran over my dog," the older woman said, pointing toward the wealthy woman standing a few feet away. "I've already called for help." She was texting while driving, and the dog ran into the street. She didn't stop until the dog was hit. The officers glanced at each other, exchanging a brief look before turning their attention to the wealthy woman. The female officer raised an eyebrow, clearly waiting for an explanation. The wealthy woman opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. She wasn't sure how to explain herself. She had been distracted. She had been careless. But in the world she lived in, mistakes like this were meant to be swept under the rug. People like her didn't get caught in situations like this. They had the power to make problems go away. I didn't see the dog," she finally stammered, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I was texting. I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear." The police officer nodded slowly, taking in her words. "I understand. But we'll need to report this, and we'll need to take a statement from both of you. The situation is serious." The wealthy woman's stomach churned as she realized just how serious this was. She was beginning to understand that she wasn't going to be able to buy her way out of this. There was no escaping the fact that she had caused harm, and now she would have to face the consequences. The older woman stood silently as the officers took down her statement and asked for details about the dog's condition. The wealthy woman, on the other hand, was now being questioned in turn. She had tried to stay calm, but her nerves were getting the better of her. She couldn't stop shaking, and her hands were cold, even in the warm afternoon air. As the officers continued to question the wealthy woman, the older woman stood apart, watching the exchange. Her expression was unreadable, but it was clear that she wasn't going to back down from holding the woman accountable for her actions. She had made it clear that this wasn't just a simple accident, it was something that needed to be addressed properly. The police officers, after gathering all the information, spoke to both women about the next steps. They assured the wealthy woman that she would be contacted by the appropriate authorities and that a full report would be filed. The older woman, despite her own grief, kept a cool demeanor, knowing that justice would eventually be served. The wealthy woman, realizing the seriousness of the situation, nodded quietly. She didn't say much more, her thoughts consumed by the reality that her life would never be the same after this. She had made a mistake, a costly one, and now she would have to face the fallout. The moment the police officers finished taking their statements, The tension between the two women was palpable. The air seemed heavy with unspoken words, and the wealthy woman could feel the pressure building inside her chest. She had been hoping for a way out of this mess, but now it was clear that things were not going to be as simple as she had imagined. She had never been in a situation where money couldn't fix things, and this was one of those moments that reminded her that not everything in life could be controlled with a checkbook. The older woman, still standing calmly beside the police officers, didn't seem to be affected by the chaos around her. She had handled the situation with poise, from the moment the accident happened to now, where she remained in control. Despite the fact that her dog was hurt and in pain, she had kept her composure. The wealthy woman couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and frustration. How could this woman be so composed in the face of such a painful event? After the police officers left, promising to file the report and follow up on the case, the older woman turned and walked toward the injured dog, cradling it gently in her arms. The wealthy woman stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. She had hoped that once the police left, things would calm down. But it felt like the situation had only just begun. She took a step forward, her mind swirling with thoughts of what had just transpired. I'm really sorry, she said, her voice softer now. I didn't mean for this to happen. The older woman stopped for a moment, looking over her shoulder at the wealthy woman. Her eyes were tired but not angry, and the expression on her face seemed to soften just a little. You keep saying you're sorry, she said. But that doesn't change what happened. The wealthy woman's heart sank at the words. She had expected a different response, maybe one of forgiveness or at least understanding. But the older woman wasn't interested in pity. She was focused on the facts. I understand that you didn't mean for it to happen, the older woman continued. But that doesn't take away the fact that my dog is hurt because of your carelessness. And now we both have to deal with the consequences. The wealthy woman's stomach churned. She hadn't thought about it that way before. To her, it was just an accident. She had been distracted, yes, but she never imagined that things would escalate this far. She had money, she had influence, and that had always been enough to make things go away. But now, she was realizing that not even her wealth could fix the damage she had caused. The older woman continued to walk, heading toward a nearby bench. She gently placed the dog down beside her and sat beside it, stroking its fur softly. The dog whimpered but seemed to relax under her touch, as though it trusted her to make everything okay. The wealthy woman stood at a distance, unsure of what to do. She wanted to help, but it felt like the older woman wasn't interested in her assistance. She had tried to make things right, but it wasn't enough. I want to help, the wealthy woman said, taking a hesitant step toward the bench. I'll pay for the vet bills. I'll make sure your dog gets the best care. The older woman didn't look up at her immediately. She just continued to gently pet the dog, lost in her own thoughts. It's not about money, she said finally, her voice calm but firm. I don't want your money. What I want is for people to take responsibility for their actions. The words stung, and the wealthy woman found herself at a loss for words. What could she say to that? She had spent her entire life believing that money could solve any problem, but now she was realizing just how wrong she had been. I know it was an accident, the older woman continued, her tone softening slightly. But that doesn't mean there aren't consequences. You need to understand that. The wealthy woman nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had never felt more out of control in her life. She had no idea how to fix this, how to make it right. Everything she had ever known seemed useless in this moment. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. After a few moments of silence, the older woman finally looked up at her. Her gaze was steady but not unkind. I know this is hard for you, she said. But it's also hard for me. My dog is in pain, and there's nothing I can do to take that away. But I'll make sure he's taken care of, no matter what. And I'll make sure that you learn from this. The wealthy woman took a deep breath, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She didn't know how to make this right, but she knew that she needed to. She needed to do something to show that she understood the gravity of the situation. I don't know what to say, she whispered. But I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. The older woman nodded, her expression softening just a little. It's not about words, she said. It's about action. You can start by taking responsibility for what happened today. For the first time, the wealthy woman understood. It wasn't about the money or the apologies, it was about doing what was necessary to make things right. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could take responsibility for it. She could do better. She could learn from this. I'll take responsibility, the wealthy woman said, her voice steady now. I promise I will. The older woman gave her a small, approving nod, and then turned her attention back to the dog. Good, she said simply. That's all anyone can do. The wealthy woman stood there for a few more moments, watching the older woman as she tended to the injured dog. She felt a strange mix of guilt and relief, guilt for what she had done, and relief for finally understanding what she needed to do next. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like she was ready to face it. As she walked away, the reality of the situation settled in. This wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick. But it was a lesson she would never forget. Taking responsibility wasn't just about saying sorry, it was about showing up, doing the right thing, and making sure you learned from your mistakes. And for the first time, the wealthy woman felt like she was ready to do that. Days passed, and the situation seemed to hang in the air like a storm waiting to break. The wealthy woman found herself unable to shake the images of that day, of the dog, the injured animal, and the older woman's calm face as she had cared for it. She couldn't stop thinking about the moment when everything had changed. She had been so sure that life would continue as it always had, but now she felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something she didn't understand. Her world, a world where money could buy anything, had been shaken to its core. She had always been able to navigate problems with ease, using her status to solve them, but now, she faced something that could not be fixed with a check or a few words. The dog was injured, and her mistake had caused it. The older woman's quiet strength had left a lasting impression on her. The truth of what had happened, and the weight of her responsibility, weighed on her every day. Meanwhile, the older woman had been busy with the dog. Despite the pain, the dog was recovering slowly. She took the dog to the vet, where it was treated for broken bones and bruising. The dog's progress was slow, but it was a reminder of how fragile life could be, and how quickly things could change. The older woman had seen this kind of thing before, and yet it never made it any easier. Her heart ached every time she looked at the dog, but she remained focused on its recovery. The wealthy woman had heard nothing from the older woman since that day. She had tried calling a few times, offering help and even asking for updates on the dog's condition, but each time, she was met with polite but firm responses. The older woman was not interested in small talk or gestures of sympathy. She was focused on making sure her dog healed, and she was not looking for anything from the wealthy woman except what had been promised: responsibility. The wealthy woman couldn't help but feel the distance growing between them. She was used to being the one in control, but now she was the one on the outside, trying to find a way in. She had thought that making a generous offer would smooth things over, but it seemed like the older woman wasn't interested in that kind of reconciliation. The money, the apologies, none of it seemed to matter. What mattered was that the dog was hurt, and she was responsible. In the days that followed, the wealthy woman found herself reflecting on everything she had taken for granted. She had always believed that her wealth protected her from the harsh realities of life, but now she saw how fragile everything was. One small mistake had led to something bigger than she could have imagined. She had always prided herself on being smart, on making the right choices, but in this situation, she had failed. One afternoon, she decided to take a different approach. She would go to the older woman's house. She didn't know why, but she felt like it was the only way to show that she was serious about making things right. She needed to see the older woman in person, to apologize once again, and to demonstrate that she was truly willing to take responsibility for what she had done. When she arrived at the house, the door was slightly ajar, as if the older woman had been expecting her. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked softly. The door opened almost immediately, revealing the older woman standing there, her expression unreadable. The dog, now walking with a slight limp but clearly improving, sat by her feet, watching the wealthy woman. "I wanted to check on you," the wealthy woman said quietly, taking a step forward. "And the dog?" "I've been thinking about it a lot, and the older woman held up a hand to stop her. "I don't need your apology," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You've already said it. What I need is for you to do what you said you would do." The words stung, but the wealthy woman nodded. "I understand. I don't know how to make it right." The older woman studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "The first step is understanding that making things right doesn't happen overnight. It's not about paying for medical bills or buying things. It's about taking responsibility for your actions and making sure you learn from this." The wealthy woman looked down at the dog, which now stood and walked over to her, sniffing her hand. She bent down and gently petted the animal, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her once again. "I never realized how much a mistake like this could hurt," she admitted. "I always thought if you had the right amount of money, you could fix anything. But this is different." The older woman's gaze softened a little. She stepped closer, placing a hand gently on the dog's head. "You can't buy what matters most," she said quietly. "Not everything can be fixed with money. Sometimes, the hardest part is facing up to the fact that you've caused harm, and learning how to be better." The wealthy woman stood still, listening to the older woman's words. For the first time, she understood what she had missed all her life. She had been so focused on acquiring things, on using her wealth to get ahead, that she had never considered the true impact of her actions. It wasn't just about fixing the problem, it was about understanding the consequences and learning from them. "I'm sorry," the wealthy woman said again, this time more sincerely than ever. "I don't want to just fix this with money. I want to learn from it. I want to make sure I don't make the same mistake again." The older woman nodded, her eyes never leaving the dog. "That's the first step," she said softly. "Now, show me you're serious." And that was the turning point. The wealthy woman knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were no shortcuts in life, no easy solutions to the problems that truly mattered. But she was ready to face the truth. She had learned a lesson she would never forget. As she turned to leave, she felt a strange sense of peace. The older woman hadn't forgiven her yet, and maybe she never would. But the important thing was that she was starting to understand. She was starting to see the world differently, and that, she realized, was worth more than any amount of money. Weeks passed, and the wealthy woman found herself slowly making changes. At first, it was hard. Her world, once filled with luxuries and effortless solutions, had suddenly become much more complicated. The guilt of that day, the day she ran over the dog, still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, she began to focus on the actions she could take to make things right. It was no longer about the money or the quick fix, it was about showing the older woman, and herself, that she was serious about learning from her mistakes. She had kept her promise. She had paid for the vet bills without hesitation, but that was only the beginning. The dog had fully recovered, and though it still limped slightly, it had returned to its playful, energetic self. The older woman had sent her a brief thank you note, but it had been simple, more of an acknowledgement of the effort than an expression of forgiveness. The wealthy woman didn't expect forgiveness. What she had learned in those weeks was that it wasn't the forgiveness that mattered, it was the change. Every day, she pushed herself to be more aware, more mindful. Her distractions, once the cause of so many small mistakes, had become something she worked hard to avoid. She started paying closer attention to the details of her life, taking the time to listen, to truly engage in conversations, and to make sure she was present in every moment. No more hurrying through life with her mind preoccupied on the next task. No more thinking she could simply buy her way out of things. She had learned the hard way that real responsibility didn't come with a price tag. One afternoon, as she sat in her office, reflecting on the changes she had been trying to make, the phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and saw that it was the older woman. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been weeks since they had last spoken, and she had wondered if they would ever have another conversation again. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," she said, trying to sound calm, though she felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. The older woman's voice was steady, with a hint of warmth that surprised her. "Hello, this is. I just wanted to check in. How are things going?" The wealthy woman blinked in surprise. "Oh, it's you," she said, unable to hide the relief in her voice. "I'm doing well, really. I've been working on myself. I've been trying to make better choices." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, the wealthy woman wondered if the older woman had already decided that this was enough. That nothing would change between them. But then, the older woman spoke again, her voice calm and thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to reach out because, well, I've been thinking. I've seen you trying, and I respect that. It's not easy, but you're doing it. I think that's what matters." The wealthy woman's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I'll keep trying. I don't want to ever make that kind of mistake again." The older woman paused for a moment, then replied, "You can't change the past, but you can certainly shape the future. And that's what you've done. So, I want to say, thank you for taking responsibility." The words felt like a weight being lifted off her shoulders. The wealthy woman had been so uncertain about how to make things right, but now, for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. She wasn't perfect, she wasn't expecting to be. But the fact that the older woman recognized her efforts meant everything. "I'm glad you called," the wealthy woman said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were before, but I do want to learn, and I want to make sure I do better from here on out." The older woman's tone softened. "We're not all perfect, but that's what makes us human. It's how we handle our mistakes that counts." The conversation was brief, but it meant more to the wealthy woman than she could express. As she hung up the phone, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had taken the steps to make things right, not just with the older woman, but with herself. She didn't need to be forgiven to feel like she was moving in the right direction. It was the effort, the self-awareness, and the growth that mattered most. In the following weeks, the wealthy woman continued her journey of personal growth. She started volunteering at local shelters, helping animals in need and offering her time to causes that mattered to her. It wasn't about gaining favor or seeking forgiveness, it was about giving back in ways that were meaningful. She wasn't just writing a check anymore. She was investing her time, her energy, and her compassion. One day, as she walked into the shelter to volunteer, she was greeted by the older woman, who had brought the dog along. The dog wagged its tail excitedly, happy to see the wealthy woman. It was a small but significant gesture, one that spoke volumes about how far they had both come. "Thank you for your help," the older woman said, her eyes meeting the wealthy woman's with a quiet appreciation. You've shown that you truly understand what it means to make a difference. The wealthy woman smiled, feeling the weight of the past few months in her chest. I'm just glad I could do something that matters. The older woman nodded, and for the first time since that fateful day, they shared a moment of quiet understanding. They both knew that the road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but it was one they were both willing to walk. As the wealthy woman continued her volunteer work, she found herself more at peace with who she was becoming. The lessons she had learned, the personal growth she had undergone, were not easy, but they had shaped her into someone who could face the world with humility, empathy, and responsibility. She had learned that true strength didn't come from wealth or influence, it came from owning your mistakes, making amends, and striving to be better each day. And in that quiet, fulfilling moment, the wealthy woman realized that she was no longer defined by her past mistakes. She was defined by the choices she was making now, and the person she was becoming.